So I want to welcome everyone who's filtered in the last couple of minutes to this exciting webinar. My name is Mackie Stevens. I'm the Director of Admission, and I graduated from Bard in 2012. And I'm thrilled to be joined by President of Bard College, Leon Botstein, today, and also acclaimed writer and critic and editor-at-large at the New York Review of Books, Daniel Mendelsohn, who is a professor of humanities at Bard College. So welcome to everybody. And Leon, I think you wanted to start with some words of welcome.
Yes, I want to welcome everybody who joined, and particularly Daniel, who, when people think, what does a college president do for a living? In many cases, not many things that people would want to do. I like to say, if anybody wants to be a college president, the fact that they want to be disqualifies them. The fact is that it's not always the most pleasant of or most rewarding of jobs, but the most rewarding thing of all is the recruitment of faculty. Bringing to the college is only as good as its faculty and the people who teach. And the ideal at Bard was, in my view, always to bring faculty who have two qualities, who are first class in their chosen field of endeavor, and it doesn't have to match some narrow academic definition of it. In other words, we don't have a little script where you say, you're going to fit this role very narrowly. Number one, that they're excellent at what they do, outstanding, and that they love to teach undergraduates. They're not sitting around thinking, if only I had graduate students, only I had postdocs. Actually, it's a tradition which flourished for a very long time at Oxford and Cambridge, where actually scholars, particularly in Daniel's field and classics, look down on the acquisition of a PhD as a kind of plumbing certificate, which they didn't need to have. Now that's a British prejudice, which we don't share. But so one of the pleasures is recruiting and working together with people of really first class standing who are wonderful teachers. And I can think no better exemplar than Daniel Mendelsohn, who is a fantastic classicist, translator, writer. He even has a sense of humor, which is in short supply. And he has wide interests and has published extensively, and a fantastic writer and wonderful colleague. And he's one of the 3 faculty members who heads up our first year seminar, sort of our core reading and interpretation course. And so it was a pleasure to have a hand in recruiting him and being able to work with him. So I'm going to turn the microphone, so to speak, over to him. Daniel.
Great. Thank you, Leon, for that generous introduction. I'm happy to be here. I feel like Bard was the perfect place for me. I should say, before I start out by talking about first year seminar, I want to give a little bit of my own history, just because it sort of keys into the values of first year seminar, and it has to do with the belief in certain kinds of texts as being very useful for many reasons. So in a certain way, I'm an atypical professor because I was outside of the academy for a very long time. I was trained as an academic. I did a PhD in classics in the mid-1990s, but I was also freelance writing by the time I was writing my dissertation. And I had a taste for sort of bringing these texts that I like to a wider public. And I started writing for the New York Times and the New Yorker, the New York Review of Books. And then in the mid-2000s, Leon called me in, and I've been here ever since. So I sort of straddle the world of scholarship and academia and what some people think of as the real world. I never know exactly what that means, but one of the things, the reason I mention this is that sort of one of the things that I started doing a lot, and I guess became known for, was sort of writing about great works for a wide audience. If there's a new translation of Virgil's Aeneid, I'm going to write a big essay about it for the New Yorker, for example, or a new translation of the Iliad. And part of my work as a critic has been, in a certain sense, pedagogical. You know, I really love these texts and I want as many people as possible to know them and appreciate them. And that, I mention that because that's really the sort of core impulse, I would say, of the first year seminar. You know, that this is a course which all undergraduates have to take at Bard. It's a common course or a great books course, whatever you want to call it. It changes every 3 to 5 years. The syllabus gets revamped, a new set of directors comes in, which allows us to be supple and responsive to things that are happening out in the world. We don't teach the same syllabus for 40 years in a row. But we really believe in these texts and what they have to tell us, which is not to say we necessarily endorse the ideologies of all the texts that we teach, but we settled on a group of texts that we think in some way are representative of certain ways of looking at the world. So I've been co-directing FISEM for now 2 years with my colleagues Lauren Curtis and Omar Cheta. And what we're doing in this version of FISEM is we picked a theme. For every FISEM iteration has a theme. The theme is the self in the world. We're looking at a series of texts that explore from very many different angles, different cultures, different periods of time, the idea of how the individual relates to a wider world, the family, the state, religion, politics, science, economics, and the sequence basically goes from the ancient world to the present. The most recent text that we teach is a 1990s epic poem by the Afro-Caribbean writer Derek Walcott. The earliest text we teach is Homer's Odyssey. And between those two chronological sort of endpoints, we teach Sappho, we teach Euripides, Dante, Frederick Douglass, Virginia Woolf, the Federalist Papers, the US Constitution, Rousseau, Karl Marx, you name it. The idea is, so FISEM has, I would say, a multiple purpose. On the one hand, we're dealing with students who have all come from different backgrounds, different high schools, different kinds of instruction in their past. And this is a course that bonds the first year class as a community. They're all reading the same works. Any first year student can always talk to any other first year student because they're always reading the same stuff. It's also heavily grounded in writing. This is for many students the first course in which they're going to have college level writing assignments. We work very closely with the language and thinking people, which is a course that all the first years have to do before they actually start their classes. And we really emphasize the ability to write a college level essay at various stages through the first year. But really the first year seminar is meant to ground students in practices of reading carefully. So in each semester, there are really only 5 main texts, which are read in their entirety. If you're reading Dante's Inferno, you read the whole thing. We don't believe in excerpts. We want our first year students to feel like they've mastered some of the very most difficult and greatest texts by the time they finish their first year. So I would say between the syllabus, which exposes them to a wide variety of writing on a certain subject, the writing practices, which help them to become the kinds of expressive young intellectuals that we need them to be. And I think, you know, above all, in a kind of intangible way, the sense of intellectual community that comes out of a course like first year seminar, the fact that you can go anywhere on campus and have a conversation about a certain text or a certain kind of text, argue about it, discuss it, I think is probably one of the main benefits of having taken this course. And we have events every few weeks in the Fisher Center, lecturers, panels that are related to the themes of the course, performances. So we try to have it be a wide-ranging, interesting, sometimes controversial, and always worthy of conversation kind of a course.
Thanks, Daniel. That was a really great review of a first year seminar for everyone listening. That is something you're all going to be participating in, all students who have been admitted to the class of 2024. I have a question for anyone else who's listening. If you have questions, please submit them in the chat. But I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how your experience as a writer and critic sort of allows you to identify some of the struggles that students might have when they're approaching multiple concepts, when they're approaching translation, when they're approaching writing or creating something of their own for the first time, and just sort of how that translates into a teaching environment that's exciting both for you and for the student.
Well, I would say, I mean, my own personal experience, you know, every professor, I'm not just at Bard, anywhere, every professor brings not only their background in a subject to the table when teaching, but you always are bringing the totality of your experience, you know. That's why to say, oh, X teacher of English is just as good as X other teacher of English because it's all the same core, you know, we're doing romantic poetry. So as long as they know about romantic poetry, it's all the same. That's just not true because everyone always brings themselves into the classroom. So, you know, what I bring into a classroom is, you know, I really believe in the power of these texts to tell us something true about the world. It's what I've spent my entire 35 years as a writer talking about, arguing for. And that's why I started out with that sort of short autobiographical spiel. You know, I really believe in this. That's what I am passionate about. But I think also, you know, being a writer, a published writer, a person who, you know, as I said, I only started being a professor in 2006. Until then, I was writing full time and writing on deadline. You know, I was the book critic for New York Magazine. Every Monday morning at 11 o'clock, I had to have 1,500 words ready to go, you know. And I must say that helps a lot when you're teaching students to write college level essays. And I always make the jokes that editors have made to me over the years is, you know, at a certain point, I think a lot of first year students in particular get sort of tied up in knots about producing what they think is a great college essay and having it be much better than anything they ever wrote in high school. And, you know, somebody once told me when I first started writing, you know, nobody writes their best work at 18 except people who died at 19. You know, I mean, you're always getting better. It's never perfect. The point is to get it down. I'm a great believer in producing. And students are sometimes surprised to hear that, you know, because they're so invested in getting or writing what they think is an A-level paper or a college level paper. And I say, you know what? It's any paper is better than no paper. And every writer, look, I've been doing this for now almost, God help me, you know, 4 decades. You have to get something down before you can start fussing with it and making it better. And I think I'm always very attuned in the writing related portions of both FISEM and my other courses to sort of bringing my own experience as a professional writing. You know, everyone who writes for a living knows there's no such thing as inspiration. You just have to sit down and look at that stupid blank screen and make something happen. And I often think when the students hear that, it never changes, you know. It's like that for me at the age of 60. I still, like everyone else, you know, I still have anxiety when I sit in front of a blank screen. But you have to write some crappy sentence before you write a great sentence, because that's the way it works. So I like to think that my own experience, particularly as a writer, you know, can help students get over one of the real hurdles of college level education, which is writing. You know, everybody's anxious about it. And of course, at Bard, because we are a place to think, really, you know, there's I think, a particular emphasis on self-expression, not just in writing, I should say, but obviously because we have performing arts, studio arts, you know, we believe in this project of self-expression, but I think the written essay at Bard is a particularly emphasized part of the experience, culminating, as many people already know, in the senior thesis, which is a large-scale project. And if you're in one of the fields that requires a written thesis, Mackie, you know about this because you've been through it. I see you grinning subtly. You know, that's a big thing to write a long project. But I think, you know, in my own experience, I know what it's like to suddenly move from shorter things to a big kind of project. I know exactly the psychological pressures, and I like to think I can help students through that. You know, I always say to them, don't think of it as the thesis. Think of it as 5 papers strung together and attached with a paper clip, you know.
Yeah, I think what, if I may, Daniel says, points to something which is, he's right to generalize. What he says about writing a paper is true for those of us in the performing arts about getting on stage and playing. If you're going to think you're going to give the best recital, the best performance of that piece of music at that moment, you're going to get paralyzed. Everybody is nervous. I remember when I made my debut in London with a great pianist who was in his 70s, and it was my first time doing the piece and his 170th time doing the piece. And I saw him pace back and forth nervously. And Rudolf Firkusny, and I went up to him and I said, Rudolf, I said, why are you nervous? You know, you've done this 170 times. And he smiled and he said, you'll learn it doesn't get easier. What it means is that we're always anxious. Daniel's right about that blank screen. Philip Roth, who taught here, was a guest and actually is buried here now, was a friend of several of us. And I once asked him, you know, exactly this thing that people always ask writers. So where do you get that wonderful idea from, or that inspiration? He said, from going to work every day at 8 o'clock in the morning. I mean, like anybody else, whether he could be an electrician, he could be, he goes there, and what the electrician does is fix wires, or he's looking at a blank screen. And what Daniel said is absolutely on point. When we were students, I had a wonderful teacher, and when you heard him practice in the morning, if you were in one of these, let's say, weekend seminars, and people had practice rooms, and you walked by and you heard somebody playing scales pretty out of tune, and you wondered, who's the schnook in there, you know? And you looked in the little window, and the schnook was a great violinist warming up. You know, there's no way he can get up in the morning and play perfectly. So the anxiety, our role, and that's why we need to have faculty who actually have a public of their own other than their students. In other words, some of the harshest teachers in high school and college are the people who never published. There was a guy when I was a graduate student in the history department who was a vicious son of a bitch. He terrorized, right? And I never could find anything this guy had written, but I was told by his acolytes that he's working on a multi-volume history. I won't give away who it is. And then, I mean, it was in my field, I forgot all about it. I see an obituary. He finally dies, this guy. And so I look and find out he never published. In his papers, there was nothing. He was paralyzed, and he communicated that fear and that paralysis by being viciously critical of his students. We are supportive of our students because we know what it's like. We know what to get a bad review, to go on the stage and be nervous, and to make a mistake and get out of a mistake.
Right. And I do think that, you know, look, all our professors are different and have different kinds of experience. But you know, Mackie, you've been asking specifically about how my life as a writer and a critic have informed my teaching practices. And I do think, to, you know, emphasize the point that Leon was just making, that, you know, when you're in the business of putting stuff out into the world, you know, you know that we're all in the same boat. If whether you're somebody who's been writing professionally for 35 years or a symphony orchestra conductor or a first year student at Bard, you just have to put something out there. And what's the worst that'll happen? Someone won't like it. You know, I told my students all the time, you know, you think getting a grade is hard? Wait till you're reviewed in the New York Times, you know. But, you know, so with a little bit of humor and a little bit of humanity, the key point is to engage. You know, that it's not about the product. You know, I always tell the same story when this stuff about grades comes up, as it always does. Look, we all went to college. We know that this is a real world issue. You want to do well, you want to whatever, make the dean's list, get a good grade. But I always say, you know, Euripides, because I'm a classicist and I specialize in Greek tragedy. So all Greek tragedies were originally presented as part of a competition. Every year in Athens, 3 playwrights would be selected to put on their plays that year, and then there would be a prize, first, second, and third prize. Euripides' Medea, one of the most famous of all Greek tragedies, came in 3rd. Nobody knows about number 1 and 2. They got lost in the sands of time, you know. So every time a student gets a B on a paper, I always say, you know, Medea came in 3rd. You don't know. You do not know how things are going to be judged over time, and you can't get wrapped up in that. If you're worried about the grade, you're never going to write a good paper. If you're interested in the subject, you'll write at least an interesting paper, even if it isn't a great paper.
The cases in music, you know, that Richard Wagner never wrote anything worth remembering, junk, early in his life, and he had to do that, and he wasn't deterred. Gustav Mahler competed for the Beethoven Prize as a student in the Vienna Conservatory, never won it. And we don't know who did.
Right. And so I think what my experience, but you know, I write books as well as criticism, so I know what it's like to be on both sides of this fence, you know, and honestly, all you want from the student as a professor is a sense that they're engaged in the subject, because that engagement is 10 years from now. And Mackie, you could probably speak better to this at this point than I can, because I can barely remember college at this point. But you know, what you bring away, what you take away, and what will stay with you is the stuff you were engaged with. The stuff that I probably shouldn't admit this, but when I was at undergraduate at University of Virginia, I took a course in the New Testament. And I got a terrible grade on my midterm. And so to make up the grade, because of course, that's one of the things you can do, I wrote an insanely long paper about the Gnostic Gospels. Leon, you'll enjoy this. And asked me if I remember one thing about, I wrote a 40-page paper about the Gnostic Gospels, about which I don't remember anything, because I couldn't care less about the Gnostic Gospels. But the thing, of course, everyone knows this. A course that you don't get a great grade in, but you have a wonderful time in, is the course that you will remember. The course that you studied your brains out just to please somebody and get an A, you're not going to remember anything 30, 40 years from now. So I think the quality of engagement, you know, and connected to that. So what do I do for a living as a critic? I look at books, I look at plays, I look at TV shows, I've written about movies, and I try to make sense of them. What do they mean? What are they about? You know, and that's what I'm trying to teach students to do, looking at the course, you know, the text we read in first year seminar, the text I'm teaching in the course I'm teaching now, which is about Greek and Roman epics. You know, we're all in the same boat. You're looking at a book, you read the book, okay, what did they mean? What's it about? Why is it useful? What do we don't like about it? You know, so it's that quality of being in the same boat. You know, it's not, the point of being in a college class is not to have the professor pour knowledge into you as if you are a cup and they are a pitcher. obviously there's an element of that because I did spend 6 years in the basement of a library at Princeton University learning how to be a classicist. Okay, so there's some stuff I know more about. But, the quality that you're participating in an activity of trying to figure something out is excited. This is true in the sciences. It's true when you're rehearsing a symphony. It's true, in studio art. What is this thing? How do we squeeze some meaning out of it? That's what I do in my.
And let me say one thing about that.
I want to do with my students.
What Daniel said earlier, I want to pick up something he said, that which teacher works for you is not obvious. So Daniel is unabashedly one of, our luminaries, right? So when people go to college, wherever they go, fame, reputation plays a role. I go to a college and Albert Einstein is teaching physics. I'm going to sign up for Albert Einstein's course. And John Smith and Susan Smith, who teach physics also, you've never heard of them, even though every physicist may have heard of them, you've never heard of them. Which teacher makes a difference to you is not predictable. Right. Too many students in college talk to each other and say, she's a great professor, she's terrific, she's wonderful. It may not be wonderful for you. I remember we had a colleague who told a wonderful story actually about where Daniel went to graduate school, that he gave an address to the baccalaureate class at graduating from Bard. So at the commencement, there is a commencement ceremony, and then there's the more intimate ceremony, which is every institution of ecclesiastical origin has the baccalaureate. It's in the chapel. Right. And there's a faculty speaker, and this guy told a story I'll never forget. So he was told about, he said, I'm trying to remember when I was your age, and now I'm no longer your age, as Daniel suggests, we're some distance from our college life. And I'm trying to say, what do I remember? And I took a lot of courses from very spectacular, famous people, exciting, entertaining, but I remember, the things I remember most, there was this one guy who came to class with really yellowed lecture notes that crumbled from his lectern. So the classic yellow lecture note, and he droned in a monotone, but he had the biggest influence on me. Some guy who taught a class on Milton, and that's to Daniel's point, and he remembered not only Milton, but he remembered what the guy said, yellowed lecture notes or not. And everybody told him, you're an idiot to take this old duffer's class with yellowed lecture notes. But they made a connection, and something about this guy clicked in him. So if you're a student, follow your interests. Don't follow the personality.
Yeah.
So I might interrupt here and just, we have a couple of questions, and one is directed at Daniel. Professor Mendelsohn, when you say we will feel like we have mastered these texts, how do you mean, quote, mastering a text?
Well, okay, so let me put that comment in a little bit of context. So that was in connection with my remark that in first year seminar, we don't read excerpts, we read entire text. And that we want the first year student at the end of the first year to feel like they have mastered a text. Now, trust me, nobody knows better than I do that you're not going to master the Odyssey after reading it for 3 weeks in first year seminars. So what do I mean by that? We believe in reading entire text because you at least end your reading of that text feeling like you have surveyed the whole landscape of the text. People spend their whole lives studying the Odyssey or the Aeneid or Dante or Derek Walcott or any of our authors. So you're not mastering it in the sense that I know everything about the Odyssey and now I never have to look at it again. You're mastering it, or you're getting some sense of mastery through first year seminar because you've read the whole thing. Trust me, if you read 4 of the 24 books of the Odyssey, you'll know a couple of things about the Odyssey. But if you read all of the Odyssey, even though most of it still is like a huge continent that you can explore again and again, you have some sense of what the whole thing looks like. So maybe mastering was not exactly the right word, but we do want to give students, particularly because, and I'm now basing what I'm about to say on my own experience in high school. You know, you move through things in high school English quite rapidly a lot of the times, and you have to read excerpts of certain kinds of works. And I feel that when you get to college, you should start having a sense of the totality of a work or an author or, you know, a painter or whatever you're studying, rather than little snippets. And so that's why I feel that we are committed to offering in the FISEM syllabus complete works, many of which are difficult. And you're not, you know, we're teaching this wonderful, as I said, Afro-Caribbean epic from the 1990s by Derek Walcott, Nobel Prize winning poet. And but trust me, it's a difficult text. That's the first text that you have to encounter in FISEM. A lot of students said there were parts that they didn't understand, but to go back to what Leon was saying before, not understanding is not the worst thing that can happen. I'd rather have a student read a whole work that they didn't totally understand than read 20-page excerpts that they can talk about at a cocktail party.
I mean, Daniel,
something is not the worst thing that can happen. That's the beginning of a relationship.
Daniel will remember that in FISEM, when previously when he was not running it, that we read some of the last dialogues of Plato, and the edition that was used was a Penguin edition called "The Last Days of Socrates," and it's edited by a Brit of the name Tredenik. Right now, this text has been around a long time, and for some reason, the bookstore ordered an edition which I never knew existed. I had my old copy, but a kid showed me the copy that the first-year student in my seminar at that time brought me the copy. And what had happened is that whoever had edited, I mean, you're sure you, Tredenik, is long dead, but in every 2 paragraphs, they had an italicized summary of what the student was about to read. And I thought I was going to have a stroke. I mean, why? There's no point. Why not just send the kid, the idiot editor who decided to give a summary? So Daniel's point about excerpts, I can't figure out these textbooks that says, now Karl Marx will tell you X, Y, Z. So why should I read Karl Marx 1 paragraph? I mean, it's stupid. So it's like a guidebook. I go to New York City. I don't look at New York City. I'm just looking at the guidebook to confirm whether what's in the guidebook, there is an Empire State Building. That's not what this is about. This is about what Daniel is saying, is that when you read the whole thing, first of all, the most famous bits may not be the ones that interest you.
Right.
When we sight read a piece of music, let's say you read an entire opera or an entire symphony all the way through. Now, many people can know what the main tune is, you know, but maybe the main tune is not what interests you most. You're playing there and say, wait a minute. And then there's some parts you don't fully understand. You know how to put this together just by looking at it, and the ones you don't. So when mastery, what Daniel's saying about mastery is an orientation which allows you to go further.
Further, right. And that's why it's, you know, it's related to what I was saying about writing. It's not about, you know, a lot of high school education is orientated to, you know, working the system, you know, figuring out how to get great, whatever, SAT grades and regents if you live in New York and all of that. This is different. You know, this is about the beginning of a relationship with whatever your subject is. And the beginning of any interesting relationship, as anyone knows who has gone on a blind date, is the mystery. It's not what you know or think you know, it's the parts you want to know, right? And so that's why I'd rather have a student read a difficult text in its entirety and want to revisit it or be provoked by not understanding than to just hand them a 10-page excerpt which they can master, which is no kind of mastery at all.
Can I ask you, we have a question here, Daniel, about the languages that you translate, which languages you have worked with and translate in?
Well, I've translated from modern Greek. I did a translation of a modern Greek, early 20th century modern Greek poet called Constantine Cavafy. And I'm now working on a translation from ancient Greek. I'm doing a new translation of Homer's Odyssey, actually, for the University of Chicago Press, which I'm right in the middle of. So those are the only languages I'm professionally involved with.
And a follow-up to that is, are you able to talk a little bit about the classics department, specifically Latin at Bard?
Well, yeah. I mean, we have a department with a number of distinguished classicists. One of whom, so you can do beginning Latin. You know, we do Latin at all stages at Bard, so you can come here not knowing any Latin at all and end up being a classics major and having a lot of Latin under your belt. One of my colleagues, who also happens to be one of my co-directors of first year seminar, Lauren Curtis, is a specialist in Roman poetry. Has written a very interesting book about poetry during the age of Augustus. And so if you were doing Latin at Bard, one of the things you would be working toward is doing an upper level course with somebody like Lauren. But there are other people at Bard who also teach Latin. David Ungvari, who just joined our department, is a specialist in later Latin literature, but all these people are also teaching beginning level Latin. So we have people who can offer you different parts of Latin literature and Roman civilization, even as they teach first year beginning Latin. You get the entire gamut. And of course, we have people who specialize in Greek, such as myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think most maybe listeners know this, but classics is a field. Even if one person writes, for example, Jamie Rom has written both with using Greek and Latin texts. Daniel is trained both in Greek and Latin. He may be a Hellenist in predilection, but is able to. That's a little different, let's say, than if you have someone who is teaching Russian. It doesn't mean that they also do Polish or Czech. It's a little,
Right.
It's a little different. The training. There are people with multiple Romance languages. We have a few of them who can do more than one Romance language. But if you're in Germanic languages, it's not clear you can do Danish and Norwegian. Classics is unusual. Also, it bordered literature and history. So
Yes.
Whether it's Livy or the Aeneid or Polybius or Tacitus, these are people who can also deal with philosophical texts. So we have people in philosophy who deal with classical texts. In philosophy, in literature, and in history.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the claim. When you do graduate work in classics, whatever your field of specialization is, you are required to have, and now I use this word advisedly, mastered both Greek and Latin languages, literature, and Greek and Roman culture. So any classicist, whatever their specialization, can teach pretty much the full range of classics anywhere.
And to the student who asked that question, I'm happy to put you in touch with Lauren Curtis. She would be happy to connect with you about classics at Bard. So I'll make sure to do that. We have another question, which is about sort of zooming out. What are Bard's plans for language and thinking if we're still in these social distancing circumstances? Leon, you maybe want to address that?
The message is very simple. We're going to start on time. There is no, everybody is speculating, and the speculation ranges from we'll be locked down for the rest of our lives to everything is going to open up quickly. One thing I know, which is what I don't know, and I'm not in the prophecy business. We are running Bard the way you would drive in a dense fog, very slowly. So we make decisions, keeping everything together and moving. So we intend to start on time. If it so happens that there's some restrictions on starting on time, we're prepared to do online or a mixed event. we actually think, I had a conversation actually with a colleague that rumor has it the Austrian schools are opening May 1, the Danish schools are already open, the schools in Saxony are opening, and there are the most fear-inducing predictions. The pessimists are always right. Ultimately, we're mortal. You know, there's a great scene in a movie I watched where a guy who doesn't want to marry the girl has been, although he has children with the girl, is wounded and in battle, and the priest comes over, and the soldier says to the priest, "Am I going to die?" And he says, "Yes, my son." He says, "Oh, I'm going to marry, you know, Susie." So they bring Susie over, and he marries them, and which he's been reluctant to do for the entire film. And then comes the medic, and the medic says, and the medic looks at him. He says, "You'll be up in a week." And the guy is flabbergasted, and he yells at the priest. He says, "Come over." He said, "You lied to me." He said, "I didn't lie to you." He said, "You asked me if I'm going to die." He said, "You're going to die. I didn't tell you when." So the priest tricked the guy into marrying the girl, you know, on his what he thought was his deathbed. The priest actually didn't lie. Will we be locked down for a while? Yes. Do we think that we will be able to open? We run 7 public high school early colleges in 6 cities. So we're in touch with a lot of public authorities. And so we're pretty much aligned with what the government will do and with the opening of public schools. So if the public schools are closed in the fall, then all bets are off. But if the public schools are going to open, we will open as well. And because we're small, we've had a lot of success with online. It's very time consuming, as Daniel knows. So we're going to start on time, and we hope to be able to start on time in a reasonable facsimile of our normal system.
And I will say, I know I can't speak for L&T, although we in first year seminar work closely with the L&T leaders, but I can assure anyone who's listening that the directors of the various programs are and have been for some time now, since the crisis began, working on every conceivable outcome, everything, you know, whatever is required in the fall has been thought of, has been considered. We're planning for every contingency, online, remote, a combination. So we are well ahead of whatever ball is coming our way. We're not leaving anything to chance.
Yeah, and Daniel said this earlier. It turns out everything we're doing now is going to be useful when we go back to whatever the normal is. I mean, it turns out that the experiences we've had, exactly what he's talking about, all this planning, what if, and it turns out all that material is not useless. It's not like the bomb shelter that people built in the 1950s, which ended up being useless. But it is stuff about teaching and preparing the materials in science and the arts, which is going to be helpful when we just have the normal classroom.
Yeah.
And if it helps for those listening, we are already hosting some sort of workshops that introduce the incoming first-year students to language and thinking. We've had 2 of them already. We'll have one next week, and we'll be rolling some out over the summer as well. So they're small, 15-person classes led by 2 faculty teaching a language and thinking workshop. And I've participated in both so far, just as sort of a tech support in the background. I haven't actually participated myself, but I've been there and present, and the interactions that students are having are really genuine, full of energy, and all happening online. So to those that are concerned that there is that physical, personal space, sort of relationship sitting around a table that will be lost, there's actually some really significant classes we've been running that identify the fact that won't actually be lost in the same way that a lot of people are worried about it. So, so that's important to think about. So if anyone has additional questions, please continue to submit those. We have a comment here about the summer intensive being a cornerstone and critical experience to the first year program. We agree. So we do hope that it will take place no matter what. It'll take place online or in person. And as Leon said, we're planning to host students on campus for now. And if that can't happen, you'll have access to everything that we offer at Bard, including individualized advising, which maybe we might want to talk about for the next couple of minutes, because I think that is a really important point to bring up across fields, across student interest. Really having a close relationship with your faculty advisor is crucial and something that's heavily supported at Bard. So Daniel, I don't know if you want to talk about advising.
Well, I mean, advising is a very big part of the Bard experience. I mean, I went to a big university as an undergraduate where I don't actually remember ever meeting with my advisor. But you are sort of assigned an advisor when you enter. You can change at a certain point. You know, sometimes a student will end up deciding to major in a subject and that will then ask to have an advisor in that department. But we are on top of pretty much every stage of your movement from the first to the fourth year at Bard. You're always checking with your advisor about your class choices each semester. The advisor is helping you keep on track with respect to your distribution requirements, which you have to fulfill by the time you leave. And so, you know, some people have different kinds of relationships with the advisor. Some people want a lot of advising. Some people have a pretty clear idea of what they want to do and they pop in every now and then and you sign their course sheet or whatever. But you cannot get out of under the thumb of your advisor, basically. Look, Bard is committed to particularly at the front end of your experience, a highly structured academic experience. You have 3 mandatory courses in your first year: L&T, FISEM, Citizen Science. You know, there is a structure to your experience at Bard. It's not like every semester you take 4 and 5 courses and then you get a funny hat at the end of 4 years and you walk and you take some pictures with your family. You know, this is designed to make you come out at the other end with a certain structured experience. And in order for that to work, the advisor is an important part of that. Somebody who's shepherding you, who's answering your questions, responding to your difficulties. Look, college is a big deal, especially a high-level intellectual experience. And we want to make sure that your possibilities are maximized. You know,
and I think
look, we all know that not everything is for everyone. You may think you're going to start out majoring in classics and you end up majoring in astrophysics. That's fine, but you need someone to help you navigate those things, and that's why we advise.
And in that structure, there's also a lot of freedom and flexibility. So as Daniel was saying, we assign you advisor, we're flying blind, we're based really on what Mackie and her colleagues tell us about you. And so we say, well, this looks like this would fit. But then you need as a student to find your advisor. And you do that by taking a class or the field you want to be in. In the arts, the advising is very important because no one takes offense if you want to change an advisor. So let's say, you know, I very important in the arts particularly, let's say I'm a painter, I'm a visual artist. And so I've studied with one person and I'm very impressed by what her painting is like and what her approach to art is. And then, I'd like to try something else. You know, I'm going to do 3-dimensional art. Or I want to do a little photography and not use, you know, no one takes offense. In fact, we say you should do some photography. You should actually study with an artist who thinks my work is junk. You know, my work is the wrong kind of work. You know, so there is a lot of desire to help the student develop self-confidence and a focus. The structure isn't, as Daniel pointed out, it's not pouring an ideology. There, you know, a whole, let's say if I want to be a priest or a rabbi, I expect to go to a place and they're going to tell me what to believe. In other words, that because I'm be certified to give the good housekeeping seal of, you know, how to do X in the world according to a religious authority which regulates. That's why the Catholic Church, if I go around and say I believe in married priests and that kind of thing, I'm going to get thrown out because I signed on to the, you know, to this system, and I'm teaching this system, and that somebody controls what's right or wrong. That's not what we do. Our structure is based on helping the person develop self-confidence and a focus of their own. And in that, the advising is important because we might say, you're interested, I would like a different kind of advisor. We have a fifth area you can graduate in, which is called multidisciplinary studies. Some student decides that he or she doesn't fit in any particular category, can collect a bunch of faculty, get a program approved, and developed. So the structure, the demands are of a kind of uniform standard of quality, of excellence and ambition. Daniel is absolutely right. We care less. The time as an undergrad is to dream large dreams, not little dreams about collecting, you know, pennies, you know, from returning, you know, box tops on cereal. That's not the kind of dreams we're talking about. We're talking about dreams about what you're capable of and the contribution you can make to the world and how you can realize your own ambitions and how you can help your neighbors or whatever you want to do in the world. That's what we're in the business of doing, and linking that to the intellectual, scientific, and artistic tradition that we practice.
And I would add to that, because I see there's another question about advisors, and I know that advising is something that students care a lot about. That, you know, I was saying before at the very beginning of this conversation that every professor brings everything to the table in teaching, not just your knowledge of a given subject. You know, your whole life you're bringing in some way. This is particularly true of advising. You know, so I'm a classicist, I'm a professor of humanities, but because the way that advisees are assigned, you get all kinds of students, not just people in your subject or even in your division for that matter. And you know, this is where the fact that Bard is small, the professors, it's a small community of professors. We all basically know one another. I think it's fair to say, pretty much. There may be one degree of separation, but not more. And that allows us to advise you. You know, our purpose is not to bend you to a template. It's to figure out whatever the direction is that you need to be going in. And so that's where our experience, not only of our own subjects, our own histories, our own lives, but with each other really helps. You know, often we have students, you know, a typical thing that happens when you're advising is I had a student come in, it was already mad for literature and languages, which is very much like I was as a student. And he comes to me with his course selection for the semester. He's a second semester, first year student. It was all literature courses. I said, you know, I sympathize. I would love now to be able to do nothing but take literature courses at a college. But, you know, maybe you want to take a film course. Maybe you want to take a student. First of all, you have to at some point. But, you know, so part of what we do is pushing you to sample things that you, it's like, if I may say, bringing in my own experience again, it's like having a good editor. You know, it's like a good editor will assign you a piece that you would have never thought of to write by yourself, but just has a hunch that it's a good combination of a writer and a subject. And advising is a little bit like that. You know, you get a sense, many of us have children, you know, you get a sense of who this young person is, what they might be. So it's a very strange art in a funny way, but
Yeah,
the point then not to fit you into a
box, yeah,
model or a box. It's to figure out what's going to maximize your own potential.
Mackie will remember that a graduate, a woman who became has now a very prominent medical practitioner and researcher, tells a wonderful story. She was a literature major at Bard, and her advisor, she was a junior, and he was himself an alumnus of the college. And she told this fantastic, she got an award from us for her achievements in science and medicine. And she told the story about being an undergraduate at Bard. And this advisor, she was very ambitious to be in literature, and she was a junior or even just maybe a senior. And he abruptly told her, you would be a great doctor. And now that's like that. She originally, her reaction was this kind of an insult, but he said it offhand. He wasn't saying you're not going to graduate in literature, but it was an affectionate comment. He was himself a paraplegic, so he knew what it meant to be dealt with by compassion, contempt, disregard, not even noticed. So he was very hypersensitive to the way you dealt with him as a human being, equally and affectionately, without an overdose of either sympathy or of contempt. And he said it in a way which, she said it changed her life. It's exactly Daniel's point. It rang a bell which she hadn't been aware was there. And he said in a nice way, you'd make a great doctor, it is those kinds of, that's what advising in its best sense. And she told that story. She received a medal from her alma mater for her achievements in a field she didn't even graduate in.
So I want to be mindful of the fact that it's a little past 1 o'clock. There was one last question about advising, but I think Leon actually touched on it a little bit, which is that he's right. The advisor that you're assigned comes right off of your application. It's the number one, your top ranked field of interest on the application. And thinking back to those of you who may have applied early in October, November, your thoughts on what you might want to study may have even changed since then. So we don't hold you to it. You can explore classes, and as someone who changed advisors 3 times, I can tell you it's not taken personally, and it's done with encouragement and enthusiasm and affection for you as you are figuring out what direction you want to go in. So I'll leave it there, but I want to thank you, Daniel, for joining us, and Leon, thank you both.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Mackie.
For everyone listening, this is recorded, and we'll be sending it out to a much wider audience, so those who couldn't join us for the live session can also listen in on the conversation. But for now, stay tuned. Same time tomorrow, noon tomorrow, we'll be speaking with a photographer and director of the photography program at Bard, Stephen Shore. So join us at noon for that. All right. Thank you both.
Stay well and healthy and optimistic.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye.